So hello again. Tonight we're going to talk about Earendel. This is originally it was thought of as a single large star, and they recently, this month, decided, I actually towards the end of last month in August, decided I don't think it's a star. I think it's more than that, but we'll talk about why. So on the right is a picture. I wish they didn't put the red dot line in there of how they discovered this. Back in 2022, using the Hubble Space Telescope, they saw this gravitational lensing. This is where the gravity of something massive like a star cluster that you see up towards the left there is actually bending the light from something that's behind it so that you can actually see behind the large area of gravity. And it made this string of red dots. And then when they went to look at the string of red dots, they analyzed it and said, I think this is a really distant, very large and hot star. And they gave it the name Earendel. It's actually more complicated name than that. It's WHL0137-LS, whose parent galaxy cluster is WHL0137-08. And they thought that the gravitational lensing was magnifying this star between 1,000 and 40,000 times. That's a wide spread. And they even did peer-reviewed studies with the James Webb Space Telescope in 2022 and again in 2023. And they still thought, looks like a star, looks like a particular large, bright, hot star, and it's really far away. It's actually, magnifying it farther than we could see it. We can see out to about 14 billion light years, but the gravitational lensing magnified this such that we think it's more like 28 billion light years away, and we're getting a magnified image. That's the way it stood from 2022 through August of 2025. It's a star, and it's a big hot star, and it's 28 billion light years away. And then they went back and said, let's take a look at that again. And it's not 1,000 to 40,000x, it's more like 43 to 67x. Okay, and it's not just one star. It's a globular cluster, or at least a dwarf binary pairing. And it's no longer a B type, which would be a large, bright, hot star, because it's a collection of stars. They haven't split them out individually, so they don't know what the individual star types are. But they're red because they're red shifted because they're so far away. How far away? They haven't come back and calculated that just yet. How did they correct everything? Well, it was using a specific instrument on board the James Webb Space Telescope, and they didn't use it as imaging, like taking a picture of it. They took the pixels that comprised what data they had, and they ran them through spectroscopic observation, and that's how they came away with these. We guessed wrong, it's something else. So how can they get it so wrong? Well, here are two images from the James Webb Space Telescope using two of the different instruments on board the Space Telescope. The one on the left is the mid-infrared imaging camera, MIRI. The one on the right is the near-infrared imaging camera. The one on the left, things look kind of Hubble-esque. They're kind of blurry. Things on the right are much sharper, and you can actually see the gravitational lensing effect there in the mid-center of the image, the circular shape, though almost like you can see that space is curved. You can't even see it on the left. The original study they did used MIRI. The newer study that they did used NIRCAM, but not just NIRCAM. They went back in and looked at the actual pixels that they were seeing for the individual stars in this lensing, and they did spectroscopic analysis to find out how red is the red, how bright is the red. So they use what is known as near spec. That's where you take the NIRCAM, and instead of taking a camera image, you basically put in place, it's not prisming, it's actually little microscopic shutters that bend the light, and you can do spectroscopic analysis using near spec in the near infrared range. So if you look at this data, like look at all the pixels and stuff you have available. But what you want to image, what you want to do the analysis on, is not the whole image. You want one of the little red dots in the bottom edge of that curved ring in the center. And if you zoom that way up, you're not going to be zooming it up by changing the lenses on the telescope. You're going to be zooming it up by cropping the image, throwing away pixels, and just making the image bigger. And this is what you get. So even with NIRCAM, this is what Earendel looks like. It kind of looks like one big bright thing until you look kind of up at about 11 o'clock. You see a dark kind of notch in there. And then in the bottom portions at about 7 o'clock and 4 o'clock, you also see like dark areas there. It might actually be showing you multiple stars, not just one star. And the way that you discern star type and star distance is through redshift. And you see the stuff in the middle, it looks kind of white, not red. How could that be more redshifted? That's because this is false colored. This is not infrared raw data, which would actually be gray, black and white, grayscale. And that's how the raw data appears. So you're not going to actually see red. You're going to see different levels of brightness based upon the wavelength. And that's how you tell what the redshift is, not by how red it is in infrared, but how much energy there is in the pixels. And that tells you distance. And then you want to know, well, how old is the star? How long has the star been around? You judge that by something called the metallicity, or how much of the original hydrogen, helium is left over in the star. And you do that based upon the energy level, the amplitude, the color of the pixels. So if you don't have enough pixels to clearly discern this, you could guess wrong. The initial report should have clearly stated, we don't have a lot of data. We've got enough data to make an educated guess, but it's not, we're going to conclude something because people that are paying us to do the science project, they want a conclusion. They don't want to, we think it's this. So they just said, here's what it is. And they didn't put the potential for variances in there. So here's the process by which science teams do observing. You get a team of scientists together. Sometimes it's students still in college that are working for free. And you have one lead scientist, the principal scientist, files an observation request to a team. There's a place where you can submit things for Hubble, you can submit things for James Webb, and you say, hey, I'd like to use your $1 billion+ fancy instrument to do some observing. What do you want to use? You want to use Hubble? You want to use James Webb? What do you want to use? You want to use a ground-based observatory? So you file a request. What do you want to observe? Well, I want to observe that thing that Hubble saw. Okay. What are its coordinates based upon year 2000 alignments? And so you give it that and then say, well, when would you like to observe it? Well, if you're working with university folks, it's, we want to do this when the students are there in class. Okay. What's the latest you can observe? Because the team that actually approves the observation request needs a window, not something narrow. James Webb Space Telescope, pretty much the things that are at L2, have pointing constraints. They can't point at something behind them because then they'd be staring into the moon, the Earth, and the sun. Moon and Earth, maybe you can skirt past that. The sun, that's big and bright and will burn out your instruments. There are times during the year that it has to swing around and now you can point at it. So that, and then, okay, now that we know when you might be able to observe it, what instruments do you want to use? Things like Hubble and James Webb are not just a camera. There are multiple kinds of cameras. If you want to observe spectroscopically, there's filters you might need to apply to narrow it down. What wavelengths do you want to look at? What's your exposure duration? How long? You have to go in and do the math and calculate, well, based upon the efficiency of the particular imager and the spectroscopic receiver, I need my exposure time to be 1/10 of a second, 20 seconds, 3 minutes. It can't be more than 90 minutes because that's the longest period of time that the James Webb Space Telescope can stay pointing at a target before it needs to turn the radio antenna back on to Earth and talk to Earth. Because when James Webb Space Telescope is actively observing, it cannot communicate with the Earth because the antenna that it uses to point to Earth has to move as the Earth rotates and as it goes around L2. So the motors that do that would make your image vibrate. So there's all kinds of constraints as to where you want to look, when you want to look, how long you want to look, what instruments do you want to use, what filter. You have to put all that in your request. Okay, so you filed your request. Now you get into the queue processing. There's many hundreds of requests filed per cycle, a cycle being about a year in duration. There may be too many. There may not be enough time slots available. So you may have to wait until next year, which is uncomfortable to hear for people on a fixed schedule like college students. My PhD will be done by then. I don't get to do my science. Sorry, that's welcome to life. Maybe in your postgraduate work you can do it. Let's say the instrument you want to use, even in the time frame you want to use it, not available because sometimes they have to take them down for servicing or calibration, or it may not be pointing in the right place or within your time window. They can come back and say, well, we'd like to do your observing, but we're going to have to alter it somewhat. It's not going to be when you wanted it. It may be during a different part of the year. Okay, you just have to adjust. It may not be the instrument you requested. You may get MIRI instead of NIRCAM. It's observing. We'll take what we can get. It may not be the type of spectroscopy or filters you had requested. It may be something different. So the data that you get may not be as sensitive for the thing you're looking for. But if you say, okay, make the changes, we at least have some good time with either Hubble or James Webb. We've rescheduled the work, not using the instrument we want, but we can get some data from it. So you accept it. It's approved. Great. You've got some time on the instrument, and the observations are performed not by you, but by the technical team that manages the instrument. They have to set up the instrument, and then they do the observing for you, and then they will send you the observational data back to your team, either through a website account or through an email. So you get the data back, and then you realize, I don't have enough pixels to do what I wanted to do with it. Or because of the filtering and the instrument that was used, I don't get the color range that I want. Yeah, but my science team administrator says the conclusion has to have a conclusion in it. It can't be like, we didn't get enough data, give us more money. So they'll come away with some kind of conclusion, which they did back in 2023 and 2024. But nowhere did it say, we just don't have enough pixels to make the conclusions that we're actually making. It has a poor signal to noise ratio, or the brightness range of the pixels was not sufficient to give you an accurate calculation, or we didn't calculate the gravitational lensing magnification effect correctly. We're only off by, I don't know, 40,000 times. And we don't have enough data to say, is it one star? Is it multiple stars? Is it a binary? Even if your administrator doesn't like it, you can come away with conclusions, but include the probability of accuracy. That's good science to just say, what is the range, and then where your sweet spot is. So in summary, astronomical observations are a crapshoot. You submit your request, you get the request approved, may not be exactly what you want, but science teams that are commissioned to do money with grants or university endowments, they've got to go do the science with whatever instruments they can get in order to get the money. You may not get the instrument you want. It may not have the right filtering and bandwidth and wavelength. And you may get imaging when you need spectroscopic. You may not get the filters you want, but you've got some time on the instrument, so you do your observations. If you come away with a conclusion, state the level of inaccuracy in your conclusion. It's okay to be wrong so long as you said, I'm accurate within this tolerance range. And then you find a better way of doing it through better observations or later observations. And you go, that was a precursor. We were peer reviewed. It is what it is. And now we have better observations. If you don't identify the shortcomings, then somebody else can come along later and you don't get to reevaluate your prior report. You just look like you did, not the best top-notch science. But sometimes it's technological advancements that you need as the underpinning for what you want. Back in the late 1920s, the Andromeda Galaxy was referred to as the Andromeda Nebula, or even the Great Andromeda Nebula, because we did not have the imaging resolution to see that the nebula is actually a galaxy shaped like ours, much larger, and has lots of individual stars in it. So it was a nebula until we could do better imaging. And then it, with some naysayers, became the Andromeda Galaxy. And nowadays it's all just recognized as consensus is. It's the Andromeda Galaxy, folks. So Earendel was a big, bright red star billions of light years away. And now it's more likely a star cluster. We don't have a good understanding of the specific types of the range of stars. We used to think that star clusters were all the same type of star. And through better imaging, we realized, oh, you can have a range of different star types all in the same cluster. The way they worked this back is they just did spectroscopy using NIRSpec instead of MIRI, which is what it is. And so I have links to just Wikipedia of Earendel, and then Anton Petrov's basically doing the same thing that I just did in his way. And then the side-by-side images, if you wanted to look at those and zoom them up. And then the American Astronomical Society, AAS, had an article that was covering the improved observation. And then the next link down is actually the improved observation. So it's actually the published science paper. Okay. So how many people knew about the existence of Earendel prior to this?
Not me.
That's okay.
But I'm glad I'm not muted anymore.
That's mutated. You're not mutated anymore. Nobody's born knowing this stuff, and they keep changing it all the time. And this is a perfect example. Everybody thought they had a really good bead on Earendel. It's like, yeah, it's a big, bright B-type star. It's, much hotter than our sun and much bigger than our sun. Guess again. Whenever they think they have a good bead on things, I always go, no, time will tell.
Amazing what they can figure out from a few pixels.
And that's the part that the general public, I guess, is never really told, but I always like to open the kimono and blow away that curtain and see the man behind the parts and the Wizard of Oz kind of thing. They'll take a handful of pixels, and based upon the energy level at the wavelength, given the filtering and the sensitivity of the sensor, they'll come away with conclusions like, okay, we think it's red shifted by this amount. And you're doing that with 8 pixels? Okay, I hear what you're saying, but I look at the data. Where this first struck me was when Helen was working with Sophia, and I was kind of her ground crew for Sophia. And I went on to the Sophia site and was given access to the raw data, not the pretty color mapped images, but the raw sensor data. And I would look at, how did they know that galaxy is 13.6 billion light years away and not 12? Well,
Yeah.
the amount of energy in the pixels. How many pixels did they judge that by? About 100. Well, that's better than a handful.
Yeah, but they're pretty good pixels too.
But that's the thing is, when you're taking a picture with your $1,000+ SLR, those are good pixels, and you get a lot of light coming in. When you're taking deep sky images of something that is a small fraction of a degree across, you don't get a lot of pixels. You may be putting, I don't know, 8 million pixels in something that's 3 degrees across. So if you're shooting something that's 1/10 of a degree, you're basically tossing away a lot of pixels. There's that. Then there's the false color of it. Well, based upon the energy range of the filter of the sensor that we used for the pixels that we have in the image, we've mapped it to the Hubble, everyone agree now, look in the same direction, palette of what the colors ought to be. But remember, Hubble can see in visual, optical, ultraviolet, and infrared, but not too deep into infrared. They can see near infrared. But there are other telescopes that can see in X-ray or gamma. And I was modifying the Visual Basic software that I wrote to scan NASA GCN email observations, still looking for T Corona Borealis or Betelgeuse to go nova or supernova. And they changed the messaging format, so I had to go in and change the software to look for it differently. But I get maybe 5 of those notifications per day, and so I have to cull out the ones that are not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for neutrinos from the ice cube array in Antarctica. I'm not looking for gravitational wave notifications from LIGO or Virgo. I'm not looking for X-ray or gamma. They're too high energy. So I have to filter out all this stuff for what I really want to look for. Same thing occurs when if you get some time on a particular instrument and what you're looking for is a specific nuance at a specific wavelength, then all the other data, you may just have to throw that away because the light's not good there. And that's just a way of science. So how many people knew that the request for instrument time was so detailed and nuanced?
It seems to me that that's easy. I thought it was going to be harder than that.
Oh, it's even easier than that. There are study guides on the web provided by the instruments, provided by Hubble and provided by the James Webb Space Telescope that tell you all the technical details of the instruments. And, like they'll tell you what its energy range is for full width, half maximum. So if something outside that range, the noise is going to be too high for you to come away with conclusions, but they do anyway because management wants a paragraph that says conclusion with a conclusion. But yeah, the science teams that are really into it and the ones most likely to get approvals are the ones that study the instrument and know how to request what they want, because the teams that are looking over your request proposals, they're technical smart with the instruments as well. So if you say, I'd like to look at this particular galaxy in this constellation, and I want to do it in the third week in June of this year, well, you're going to get rejected right away because that's too narrow. There are other people in the queue. And why specifically then? Because what you want is in that part of the sky, and James Webb can't turn around that far because it'll be staring into the sun. So reject. And even the ones that, if you want to go for a ground-based observatory, like in South America or in Hawaii, yeah, they have to deal with weather. Sometimes it's condensation, clouds, ice, snow, but you can be fully approved for your time slot, and then you lose your time slot. That's just the brakes, or something breaks on the instrument, and they have to take it out of commission for 3 weeks to a month because it takes a while to get replacement one-of-a-kind parts shipped up to a mountaintop in outer Mongolia, well, not Mongolia, but
Well, could be Mongolia.
yeah. Well, I don't know which ones are. Well, I know China has some, but I don't know that they're in outer Mongolia. I think they're more towards the coastline. But yeah, you could be all approved, be salivating over your observing time, and then 2 days before your observing time starts, they tell you, never mind, so sorry, try again next year. You don't even get put at the head of the queue. You have to completely refile again because there's other things that are already in process. You can't just go back into the queue. You have to go back in a year from now if you're lucky to get approved. So,
Are there charges for this?
depending upon what organization you're associated with, there can be charges. If you're using a NASA-based instrument, you basically have to be US based or US funded. If you want to do it using some other university, they have to have an affiliation with NASA. So if you want to do something on behalf of a German science team, you're way down in the queue, but at least you can get approved. But if you're a Brazilian science team, you may not have access to instruments in the US. You may have access to instruments in China because of BRICS, but that's the politics of trying to get observing time on instruments. Is sometimes it's no outsiders allowed in, but that's
Monroe,
we paid for the instrument. Yeah,
I'm sorry, I thought you were done.
go ahead.
Okay. Monroe, this is Joanne,
Yes.
and I'm asking you to remember about 15 years ago when I was working with the SLU that my brother had gotten me for a birthday present.
Yes.
And it was connected to 3 different observatories.
Yeah.
And then you could go out there and pick whichever one you want, and then you put in your slot for when you wanted to see whatever you wanted to see. And at first, because I got it through my brother. It was free for me. So I didn't pay anything for a year. He had paid for a year for me to be on, which was wonderful. And I had a great time. I really look back at that time and wish I'd gone on more than I did. But then again, I was learning about all sorts of things at the time. And then they started charging. And I think the first time I did charge, I did pay them. But then after that, the price went really high. And then you couldn't get on even when you were paying for it. And it was like, like you were paying, but you couldn't get into a time slot. And then they would override you, like you say, like if somebody came on that had credentials,
Yes.
and I didn't have any credentials or anything like that. And so it would be, well, you got a lot of other time slots to choose from, and I didn't have a particular reason why I picked there or, it wasn't like I was just picking because that one was available. It wasn't because I thought of anything ahead. I hate to tell everybody here that I wasn't that brilliant. I'm much more brilliant now than I was then. And Monroe did help me at the time too. So that helped.
Online observing is still a thing. Yes, it's more expensive than it used to be, but I think they're choosing a price point. There is a company in Texas at a dark location in Texas. They actually have 10 warehouse-sized buildings with they're rectangular, long roll-off roofs. And in each one of those, they might have up to 100 telescopes, not the actual mounts, but piers. I think it's called StarFront. So StarFront Observatories, I'm still sharing, you should be able to see these long white rectangular buildings.
Yeah.
And then they've got a zoom up and you see when the roof is slid off, it slides off sideways. Inside there's just a large number of individual piers. These are all fixed height piers, and you can buy monthly payment time on a pier at a dark site. You fly out to the site, you bring your equipment, they charge you an integration fee to get it all hooked up, and then you have an app that you can interface with and a website that you can say, tell me when the roof over my telescope is open, and then I can remotely command it to go to and do observing. This is big time money. They started out with, I think it was 2 buildings, and now they have 11 buildings, and you can just see piers of telescopes. So this is called StarFront Observatories.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Check this out though. If you have one of those new C stars, the smart scopes, if you have an S30 or an S50, they will charge you an upfront fee for setting it up, and then they'll charge you $99 a month. And last I looked, they were even looking at staging the inventory. So you didn't even have to buy the telescope or go out to the site. They would charge you an upfront cost for that to be your C star. And then you pay $99 a month, and that becomes your remote telescope that you can use for imaging. If you stop paying for it, it's their telescope because they were just leasing it to you. So they can use that C-star telescope on the same pier for another customer that wants to come along and pay the upfront setup charge and the $99 a month. So they're looking to use low-end smart telescopes as money makers. Then for the folks that bring your own telescope, they have large telescopes. At $149 a month, you can bring an up to 32-inch diameter swing. This is not the diameter of the telescope. This is the, how much gap do you need between your pier and the next guy next to you? So if you have a long tube telescope, then you need a lot of swing room. And they'll support swing room up to 96 inches. So you could literally put the Brandon on one of their piers for $400 a month. They're selling the real estate by square foot per month. I would like to see over a 10-year period of time whether they're successful or not. I think where they're at right now and the fact that they have so many people signing up, I think they're probably 50 to 60% occupied. That's why they keep building more buildings.
I
They're
have a
originally gonna,
question.
yes.
You said the Brandon. Would you put the brand? I mean, if you could, if there was this window open for you to take the Brandon there and pay 400, and say you do it for 2 months, would you think that that would be well worth your money for
No,
$800?
no, no.
Okay.
I was just saying they'll accept a very long tube telescope up to
I got that, but I wanted to know if it would be worthwhile.
no. The Brandon is neither optically nor mechanically reliable and accurate enough to put out at a remote site.
Okay. Do you think some of the other is worthwhile?
Oh yeah, I think, if they came away and said there'll be no setup fee and you pay $99 a month and it's not on a fixed term, 3 months of a C-Star S50, you might have an enjoyable time at $100 a month.
When they say no setup fee, that means you would go out there and set it up yourself.
No. You don't actually own the telescope.
Oh,
You'll basically be leasing time on one of their telescopes. They'll put the telescope in. You won't even have any choice like what building it's in or what position it's in. And you might get stuck in a corner.
can you ask for what telescope you want?
Based upon how much money you want to pay. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm thinking they're going to start with the C stars at a low introductory cost. You see, it's $99 a month, but there's a setup fee, and there's a month. Like it's like you go to get an iPhone, and you get an iPhone from Verizon or T-Mobile or AT&T. You don't have to buy the entire iPhone up front. You can basically lease your iPhone from the provider. You pay $79 a month or whatever, and you get a low-end iPhone. And at the end of 2 years, you don't own that iPhone anymore. They want it back, and then you can lease another one.
Yeah.
Same sort of thing. If they don't charge you an upfront fee for you to buy the telescope and fly out there and install it, if they'll do all that for you for no setup fee, and then all you have to do is pay $99 a month, and when you stop paying the $99 a month, they get to keep the telescope because it was never yours, and they get to resell the time on that telescope to someone else. It's like a mini shopping mall kind of thing. You
Yeah.
don't own the building in the shopping mall. You put your business in there, you do your business. If your business wants to move elsewhere or move upscale or goes under, they keep the building. Well, they keep the telescope. It's an interesting business model.
If they
Yes.
they shouldn't have to charge the next guy a setup fee.
Correct. And by the time it's like rental cars. When you go when you go to lease a rental car, you don't pay any like down payment on the lease. You just lease it because as soon as you're done, they'll lease it to another person and another person. And then 2 or 3 years down the road, they'll try and sell that 70,000 mile leased vehicle for 50% of the original cost of the vehicle. And if you don't mind the fact that it's got 70,000 miles on it, you're getting that car at half price. It's the same kind of model, but for telescopes. But you don't drive around telescopes. You use them at a dark site. And, when the roof is open and the sky's good and clear, it's your telescope. You get connection to it. You tell it to go wherever you want it to go and take whatever images you want. And you download the pictures. So, it's an interesting business model. And they've invested, let's just say, I'm going to guess $1 million+ between
Oh.
11 buildings, the giant cement platforms, and the probably close to 1,000 piers they've got now. That's a huge investment. So they've got to have a number of people with large amateur telescopes that don't mind paying a few $100s a month to have it stationed at an observatory at a dark site where they don't have to own the property. They don't have to, periodically go out there and maintain it. They'll actually charge you by the hour for work on your telescope. So if you say, hey, I'm going to ship out a new USB hub to take me from USB 2 to USB 3. I need your guys to install it. And they go, yeah, we can do that in about an hour. How much is it going to cost? $200 an hour. Okay, fine. Because you paid $10,000+ for your very expensive amateur telescope, and you don't mind putting that little bit of good money after big good money. So it's a business. I think it's an interesting business model. We'll see how well it does. Okay.
How many scientific discoveries get changed? They'll say, "Oh, well, we were wrong. It should have been this way."
Yeah.
Every 20 years it changes, so you wonder what's right.
Well, it's right at the moment. Like I said, in the late 1920s, it was the Andromeda Nebula, and
Yeah, it was great.
they had to get to like the late 60s before the Andromeda Galaxy. Technology had to improve. I'm okay with that, but yeah, there's a lot of people that guess wrong. Like I think 3I Atlas is an alien spacecraft, and what's your proof of that? I just know it is. Okay. And then there's Helen's favorite, which is peer review. There are so many publications now that just want to get their first out with the scientific report before anybody else gets to look at it, other than their editors, which have no idea what you're talking about when they read your report. They just go, is the grammar correct? Is the spelling correct? And then they publish it. And then you find out the data is bupkis. So that's a technical term. And then they withdraw the report, or they go back in and, well, it's not a big, bright, hot star. It's actually a star cluster. But now they've had other, observing teams go, yep, you're right. It's not one star. Could be a binary, could be a cluster, leaning towards a cluster. Percentage says cluster, but they don't have the confirmed evidence in yet because too few pixels. But I'm okay with that. But when something works and it works, I'm okay with going with that. But things improve. Like last week's presentation on smart telescopes. $2,000? I'm not buying that. $1,000? I'm not buying that. $500? You've got some interest. I'll keep watching the marketplace. $300. But it's the startup and they haven't produced any product yet. Well, when you produce a product and it's $300 list price and like post-Christmas closeout and you're selling them for $270, I'd probably buy one. But not until then, because I know the true cost of those parts, because I buy a lot of those parts. You've got a computer in there. Computers are expensive. No, they're not. If you know what's going on in a computer, I bought one this last week for the radio telescope mount. I think it was $26. I got a Raspberry Pi 02W, which is a gigahertz processor. It's quad core, 64-bit, has half a gig of RAM and up to 32 gig of SD card flash. And it's the size of a stick of chewing gum. Oh, that also includes the USB cable adapter and the HDMI cable adapter and the 2x40 pin strip to solder in to connect up all the sensors, all for that, under $30 price tag. So don't tell me your computer inside your telescope mount is worth hundreds of dollars. That's just multi-X markup. But it does take money that you have to invest to create the hardware as a package to, get the injection molding for the plastic and build a few, trial runs before you turn on the mass production. I understand that there's a cost for that. And the initial units is when you want to get your reimbursement for that. And by the time you've got it up and running in volume production, all of that cost is amortized off. And then the next people that buy them, not the bleeding edge, but the mass production run, they're going to get a lowered price. But then when it's post-holiday season, you want to move your inventory so you don't have to pay asset taxes on it, depending upon what state you're in. So you make 20% off or something. And then you get people like me to be interested. Business has always been like that. I mean, okay, that's all I've got. Anything else before I stop recording? Hearing nothing.
Thank you. Thank you.